evening. This is Atheist History Week, and I'm John Rafferty, President of the Secular Humanist Society of New York, and also a proud and active member of New York City Atheists, which produces this show. Each week at this time, we look at the week's anniversaries in the history of free thought, of atheism, agnosticism, secularism, humanism, skepticism, rationalism, whatever you have ism. Anniversaries such as the birth or death dates of notable people, the famous and the maybe not so famous and sometimes the infamous, who have done something or many things notable in the history of free thought during this calendar week. We also look at significant events that took place during this week in history: court cases, book publishings, play premieres, and as well religious fun and games like burnings at the stake and pogroms and other faith-based initiatives. Let's start this week with a man who once said, "Religion disapproves of original thought the way Dracula does sunlight." And I recommend to you Pat Condell. Born November 1st in 1951. And as soon as this program is over, in another 29 minutes, I want you to go online and go to YouTube and type in Pat Condell and then start watching some of the most literate, sophisticated, and very, very funny commentary on religion. That's what this, I was going to say comedian, but what's the better word? Humorist. That's what this humorist has taken as his subject matter. Religion in the world today. He was a lumberjack and all kinds of things. After growing up in South London, in a Catholic family, but somehow went to Church of England schools, so he was ostracized 6 ways towards the middle, and he said, once you realize the gulf between people who believe different things, you can't take any of it seriously. He became a stand-up comic and a writer for other comics, and then he said, I set out to write a show in order to say something, rather than just as a vehicle for stand-up. It seems to me that fundamentalist Christians, jihadist Muslims, and settlement-building Jews are causing more than their share of trouble in the world. World events are being driven by people with apocalyptic delusions, while here in Britain, a paralyzing liberal guilt allows religious bigots to use intimidation and violence to stamp out free speech. If you can't get laughs out of all of that, you can't get them out of anything. He has become a sensation on the web. At the time that the Freedom from Religion Foundation wrote this stuff this research that I'm using, he had 39 pro-atheist and anti-religious monologues. I'm sure it's a lot more than that by now. And those 39 had tallied up 8 million hits. The trouble with Islam, in one of his monologues, alone at that time, had reached over 2 million hits on the web. Condell is, you got to see for yourself. I urge you to go, Pat Condell, Condell, and read it. Is he militant? No. He says, I admire anyone who's genuinely trying to achieve spiritual enlightenment and live a peaceful life. But religious dogma is a barrier to that. The last thing a dogmatist wants is for anyone to be enlightened, any more than a pharmaceutical company wants anybody cured. Ask what you can do to resist the growing influence of religion, he said. Use their tactics if you feel strongly enough. Make a nuisance of yourself. Make an official complaint. Take it to a tribunal. As an atheist, you're part of a minority whose beliefs are consistently ignored and marginalized, while religious prejudice is pandered to and encouraged, and you have every right to be offended by that. Remember, one person on their own can't do much, but a million people each doing a little every day can change things very quickly. Somebody we all know, but we may not all of us know his philosophical ideas. Burt Lancaster, the actor, was born November 2nd, 1913 in New York City into an Irish Protestant family. Grew up in a tough neighborhood. He said fistfights and rock fights all day long. He dropped out of college to form an acrobatic team with his boyhood friend Nick Cravat, and they traveled, joined the Ringling Brothers Circus. He was a circus performer. And a film producer's assistant saw him and convinced him for a role in a play called The Sound of, which he did, and then he got in his first film, The Killers, the movie based on the short story by Ernest Hemingway, and his career in the movies took off. Lancaster was not only tough physically, he was tough up here. He took religious, ethical, and political points of view and worked at them all his life. He was nearly blacklisted in Hollywood in 1947 after signing a letter deploring the anti-communist witch hunts. Naturally, therefore, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI kept a file on him because why should somebody complain about a witch hunt unless he's a witch? He was offered the part of Ben-Hur in the movie Ben-Hur, which Charlton Heston did. Didn't want to play a religious character, but he did play Elmer Gantry, and he won the Best Actor Oscar for his performance as that oily, rotten preacher. Burt Lancaster marched with Martin Luther King in Washington in 1963, was a peace campaigner for George McGovern in 1972, and earned lasting distinction as one of the 575 people on President Nixon's enemies list in 1973. He was a card-carrying member of the ACLU. Matter of fact, made a funny commercial when Michael Dukakis was running for president, and the right wing said he's a card-carrying member of the ACLU. Several notable people made short commercials holding up their cards and confessing they're members. I'm a member of the ACLU too. No one agrees with every single thing the ACLU has done, Burt Lancaster once said, but no one can disagree with the guiding principle, with liberty and justice for all. Burt Lancaster, who died in 1994 and was born on November 2nd in 1913. Born on November 3rd in 1901 was the French writer and freedom fighter André Malraux. Born in Paris. And I think the word freedom fighter is thrown around indiscriminately today, but it really applies to Malraux. He studied Asian language in school, and he became very closely identified with the Vietnamese campaign for independence against the colonial rule of the French in Indochina. Co-founded the Young Annam League and founded the newspaper Indochina in Chains. He wrote several novels which were popular in France in the 1930s, which we don't hear much about today. And then came the Spanish Civil War, and Malraux was a pilot for the Republicans, was wounded twice, and came to the United States to raise money for the Republican cause. Man defines himself by what he does, Malraux wrote, not by what he dreams. Then came World War II. Malraux joined the Army, even though he was then just about 40. He nevertheless joined the Army, was captured in 1940, escaped, and joined the French Resistance. In 1944, he was captured by the Gestapo, who set up a mock execution to try to frighten him into ratting on his friends, which didn't work. But then he was rescued by the resistance and got out, and he joined the Free French. And after the Allied invasion of France, he fought at Strasbourg, and he was awarded the Croix de Guerre. Under de Gaulle's government after the war, he was the Minister of Information and the Minister of Cultural Affairs. To the absurd myths of God and an immortal soul, he wrote, the modern world, in its radical impotence, has only succeeded in opposing the ridiculous myths of science and progress. André Malraux, born November 3rd in 1901, one of the real good guys of the 20th century. One of the real good guys of the 19th and 20th century was Robert Ingersoll, the great agnostic. He had two daughters, and on November 4th in 1864, his second daughter, Maud Ingersoll, was born, who followed in her father's footsteps on the Chautauqua stage and lectured on free thought most of her life. But she achieved major public attention because she and her sister, but mostly Maud, led the charge. After Ingersoll's death, after Robert Ingersoll's death, as one can almost predict, some Baptist preacher in Alabama said Ingersoll must have converted on his deathbed. He couldn't have faced his maker, and then somebody else picks it up, and the next thing you know, there are newspaper stories that Ingersoll had repented on his deathbed. Maud Ingersoll wrote, in fact, the very morning of his death, my father was working on a new lecture on Jesus Christ to be delivered the next winter, and in which he intended saying that Christ was a myth. She and her sister, denying that religious conversion, which was promulgated by one Reverend W.W. Landrum of the First Baptist Church of Atlanta, Georgia, where else, said, I wish to state emphatically that there isn't a word of truth in this statement. Neither my sister nor myself is connected with any church in any way, although our Father has always wished for us to study and think for ourselves. We agree with him heartily in his religious belief. In other words, no belief. Maud Ingersoll, who carried on her father's legacy, born November 4th in 1864 and lived until 1936. On November 6th in 1976, Pat Tillman was born. Pat Tillman, we all know, as the millionaire National Football League Arizona Cardinals player who, after the 9/11 attacks in 2001, quit football and joined the U.S. Army and died in Afghanistan, and was widely celebrated by the super patriots in America, who said, here, this great guy who gave up his millions to go fight for God and country and George W. Bush, and why aren't all the rest of you lazy louts doing the same thing? We then found out that he was killed accidentally by friendly fire, and that he wasn't super religious or super patriotic at all. That he was anti-war. He'd gone over there, he was fighting, he was doing his duty, he'd volunteered to do it. But he considered, after a while, he considered the war he was fighting as illegal. And when there was a memorial service, his family, who were not religious, had quotations from Emerson and other pacifists at the memorial service, all of which, of course, caused an uproar, and the religious right in America started calling this family that they were eulogizing just weeks before, calling them traitors and whatnot. Okay. Hold your spiritual bromides, his brother Richard said at the memorial service. Pat isn't with God. He's effing dead. He wasn't religious, so thank you for your thoughts, but he's effing dead. I've cleaned that up a little bit. At any rate, Pat Tillman, a free thinker and a rationalist and a patriot, who died accidentally and unfortunately in a war that he had concluded was illegal. And this one-time icon of the super patriotic right, who is now, and his whole family, decried as a traitor for getting himself killed. A name that all of us ought to know a little bit better, an unusual name, Vashti Cromwell McCullum. Was born on November 6th in 1912. A champion of the First Amendment. She was born in Lyon, New York, and she was named by her mother for a biblical character who was, quote, the first exponent of women's rights. I'm not familiar with that, but I'll take Mom's word for it. She grew up, was educated, got married, had 3 children, and living happily in Champaign, Illinois. And one day, her oldest boy, Jim, was entering the 4th grade and came home and told her that he was being pressured to participate in religious instruction. And a free thinker and an atheist, Vashti Cromwell McCullum, withdrew him from the class, at which point the school authorities put Jim in what amounted to detention. And so she filed suit to stop the unconstitutional instruction, and she had a terrible time. She was branded that awful woman, and but she stuck with the lawsuit, and she lost both. She lost the trial, she lost at the appellate court, but she persisted, and she got it up to the Supreme Court, where on March 8th, 1948, in an 8-1 decision delivered by Justice Hugo Black, vindicated her and said, no, children in public schools are not going to take religious instruction, period. She won, 8-1. Vashti McCullum went on to serve 2 terms as president of the American Humanist Association, and was awarded the Champions of the First Amendment award by them, and lived until quite recently, at the age in her 90s, dying in 2006. Between being praised and persecuted, she said in a speech, condoned and condemned, I might understandably have become bewildered particularly at the brand of ethics sometimes displayed by the staunch defenders of Christianity. But of one thing I am sure that I fought not only for what I earnestly believe to be right, but for the truest kind of religious freedom intended by the First Amendment, the complete separation of church and state. Tough woman who fought for what she believed in. Another fighter for the truth, or for what he believed to be the truth, was Eugene V. Debs. Born November 5th in 1855, a reformer, a labor leader, and a socialist who ran for president several times, and who was born in Terre Haute, Indiana. His mother had left the Catholic Church and did not have him baptized, and the living room in which he grew up did not have pictures of Jesus, but instead had busts of Voltaire and Rousseau. And a teacher, when Debs was very young, gave him a Bible as an academic award for achievement in school. And the teacher wrote in the Bible, "Read and obey." And Debs later said, "I never did either." He dropped out of school at the age of 14 to work, and he became active in the labor movement. He became nationally known, routinely attacking the church, promoting women's rights and racial equality, and justice for the poor. "If I were hungry and ridiculous today," he wrote, "I would rather take my chances with a saloon keeper than with the average preacher." He saved his strongest denunciations for that same Roman Catholic Church that his mother had left, because he considered it an anti-democratic, anti-family, authoritarian, political machine. For his labor activism, he was thrown in jail several times. Completely, when you think about it now, when you analyze it from our point of view, he was put in jail totally illegally. He was put in jail for striking. He ran for president as a candidate of the Socialist Party in 1900, 1904, 1908, 1912, and 1920. I'm not absolutely sure about it. If you notice, it skipped over 1916. He was probably in jail for pacifist activities, and I think that's true. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, he certainly went to jail in 1918 for speaking out against American involvement in World War I. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and disenfranchised for life, losing citizenship. Although he was in jail, he was in prison in 1920. He was nominated by the Socialists again, and won nearly 1 million votes while in prison. And Warren Harding commuted his sentence, and he released him on Christmas Day in 1921, where he was welcomed by 1,000 fellow neighbors in Terre Haute, Indiana, on his return. He died shortly after his health had been broken by his imprisonment. He fought against the machine. The press and the pulpit, he wrote, have in every age and every nation been on the side of the exploiting class and the ruling class. Marie Curie was born on November 6th in 1867, and as she said, she and her husband belonged to no religion. This was after he died, and she said, "And I now do not practice any." She as a two-time Nobel Prize winner. She and Pierre were jointly awarded the 1903 Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering polonium, which was named for Poland, her home country, for they discovered polonium and radium. And by the way, she coined the very word radioactive. And in 1911, she won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, the first person, male or female, to have received 2 Nobels.
Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation, at least not just. We are also a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, and a Buddhist nation, and a Hindu nation, and a nation of non-believers.